Well, hello, and welcome back. For those of you that are watching this stream live, I want to let you know that I do have comments open on YouTube. So if you want to switch over there and shoot me something while this is live, you can. Oh, I'm getting a little feedback right now. I'll open it up for view in the chat. And for those of you that are not viewing this live, check the link in the description. There may be the edited version of the video in the Beyond Code Bootcamp playlist. With that said, let's go ahead and get into tonight's topic. Well, hello, and welcome back. Tonight, I'm just going to rapid spitfire as much as I can explaining Programmer Lingo. I've got this list of stuff that eventually I'm going to get through it all, but tonight I'm just going to get through a little bit of it and give you the briefest explanation that I can on each item. These are all in random order. So, TLDR, this means too long, didn't read. It means either somebody's giving you a summary section or they want a summary section for some documentation or an explanation. Timing attack is when a piece of code can be run very, very quickly, and small variations in how the code runs can reveal a secret that is embedded in the code or something that we don't want people to know. So basically, if you run something one time, you'd never notice the difference. But if you run it 5,000 times or 5 million times with slightly different inputs, you could get different answers. This is typically used for getting a key or a password or something like that. Duck typing means that you are programming with types that are not defined as classes or object-oriented programming per se, but rather that if things have similar features or functions, they fall into that type. So if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If it has a quack function and it can put out a string, then it is a duck type of thing. Scope refers to a couple of different things. It could be scope of project. Typically, I'd say more commonly when we say scope, what we mean is the relation of variables and functions and pieces of data as they get grouped together when you look at a program lexicographically. Basically meaning when you look at code, it gets indented. And the further indented it is, the more curly braces it has, the more scope is being encapsulated. The outermost set of curly braces is typically a function, the innermost might be an if statement, and everything that is on the outer side and above will typically be available in the inner and below, but not if the inner closes. Just the outer part is available, both top and bottom. Inner parts are available top and bottom of that inner part, and outer parts are available in the inner parts. But anyway, we'll move on. Hashes and encodings. These are actually two different things. I don't know why I put them together. A hash is a function, typically a mathematical function, because everything can be converted into a number. You can number the alphabet, for example. A could be 0, B could be 1, C could be 2, so on and so forth. So everything, that's why I put encodings. That is called an encoding. Anytime that you assign numbers to something, that is an encoding. So a hash is a way of encoding. You encode some information as numbers, and then you perform a mathematical operation, which is easy to do, but hard to figure out. A good example of this is if you're familiar with the remainder or modulus operator in division. A remainder is very easy to calculate. If I give you two numbers, which I won't because I'm not going to do math on the fly with odd numbers, which is where this is, and prime numbers, which is where this is most effective. But if I were to give you two numbers and ask you to divide one by the other, but not give me the answer, only give me the remainder of what can't be divided, it's very easy to perform that function again, but it is very difficult, given the answer, to be able to determine what the inputs were. And hashes are just a more interesting way of doing this so that you can create IDs. Paths. So on your computer, you have directories and folders and files, and they all have a path that starts at root, which is a slash, or if you're on Windows, then C:, which is the only system that works that way. Everything else, from your watch to your toaster to your iPhone to your web server, all starts with a slash. And the home area is what you are given when you log in. So it's kind of like going into your room. There can be absolute paths and relative paths. That means absolute path always starts with the very first slash or the semicolon, and a relative path starts with a dot slash or a tilde slash, meaning from home, that's a tilde slash, or dot slash from the working directory. And then we also have script relative paths, meaning that when you are programming, it is common that the program will consider a path from itself, not necessarily from its working directory, depending on how you use it. You'll see this when you see it. Okay, .env. env files and environment variables are variables that you do not build into a program, but when a program runs, you want the program to have access to them. So it's kind of like options or flags that you would give in addition to the program, but instead, these are kind of, in a sense, hidden away in what's called the environment. So they're variables that the program can access while it's running, not variables that you pass to the program or that you write into the code. So it takes a little bit more explaining to really understand that. Red, green, refactor, this is a methodology. So red means that you create a test for a program or a condition for a program that when there is no program or the program is incorrect, it fails. Green means that you improve your program so that it can accomplish that functionality, and refactor means that once it's working well, you go back and adjust it to make it easier to understand or to read or to share with others. Mythical Man Month is the idea that if there are 4 programmers on a team and we add 5 programmers, or let's say we add another 4 programmers, so now we have 8 programmers, the project should be completed twice as fast. In reality, the first 4 programmers now have to work at half speed or less because they have to train the new 4 programmers, and instead of getting things done faster, you actually get them done slower. Debug is the idea that you have some problem with your code where it is red, as we mentioned before, it's not working properly, and you go through and try to figure out why it's not working properly. The assumption being that you think it should work properly. It is not obvious why it doesn't work properly. It is not that you not forgot, but it is not that you have not completed it yet, but that what you have completed does not work and you need to find it. Stuttering refers to when you have names of variables or packages or files or programs that repeat over and over again. So for example, if I had a project folder that was called foo, and then inside of that I had a folder called foo that contained the main package foo, and inside of that I had a file called foo.js, and then inside of that I declared a module foo, and then I had a export that belonged to that module that was called foo. This would be stuttering. This is actually pretty common because it's very natural to do, but when you look at it, it seems kind of silly. Things should have distinct names, and if they don't have distinct names, you can probably collapse them a little bit. So in the example that I gave here, we could probably collapse this down to just admin.FS.Open. Okay, lingo. Lingo just means the words that people use that are specific to their vocabulary of their profession or hobby or whatever. Foo, bar, baz, quux, oh gosh, garply, larp, I don't remember all of them. There is actually, not joking, an internationally recognized standard. I believe it was an April Fool's joke, but it did pass through. There are a number of April Fool's jokes that have made it into international standards. But there are a declared set of variable names, which are the canonical variable names that should be used as examples. So when you see someone put in a piece of documentation, or in their code, things like foo, bar, baz, and other similar made-up words, these words come from that specification as names that should be used as nonsense rather than the word, for example, example, or whatever. Breadth first means that you go across a domain, meaning that you spread into multiple domains or adjacent domains. So if I am searching, say, a maze, I search each path as I come across it, or if I am learning about a topic of study, I learn things that are adjacent to that topic of study. Depth first is the opposite. It means that I am more specific and I drill down. So if I'm traversing a maze, I follow one path all the way until the end, and then after that I explore the next path all the way to the end. If I am learning something, I become an expert in it before I learn something that is adjacent. Globbing refers to searching for file paths and often has star characters. There are one star character is considered to be a wildcard like this, and 2 star characters is considered to be a directory wildcard. So if I use something that supports globs and I put in star.go, it will find all of the .go files in that current directory. But if I put /star.go, then not only will it find it in the current directory, but in all child directories as well. Regular expressions are kind of a sub-programming language. It's a way to do pattern matching. It was developed for linguistics, but found its way into computer science. It turns out that human languages are not particularly regular, but machine languages are particularly regular. That said, you can use this to match things, like, for example, parse things that are relatively similar. There's 3 or 4 different ways to format a phone number, but they're similar enough that if you ignore, say, the parentheses or the dots or the dashes and the +1 at the beginning, you can arrive at what that's supposed to be. So regular expressions it's a very terse type of, this is what it looks like. It looks like stuff like this. Whoa, I don't actually want to have that there. But it's very terse, but it allows you to do searches and matches and indexes very, very quickly, and in many cases very, very efficiently. A pager is a program that, when you are looking at documentation in a terminal, allows it to scroll. And I think I'm hitting up on time here, but I'll do a couple more. Daily driver is basically the programmer equivalent of everyday carry. It means something that a person uses on a regular basis. So, for example, the certain terminal programs that they use or certain tools that they use, these are things that they use on a daily basis to help them with their work. They call them daily drivers. Data structures refers to how information is sorted. So what you're most familiar with, most likely, is a spreadsheet. It is just a list of an array of information. An array is a data structure. It is a list of information. A list of information, so a spreadsheet again, one list goes this way, but then the list of lists goes this way because there is a list in which each item is a list. So that is a data structure. Other data structures include things like tree. For example, your ancestry. That is a data structure. It is a tree. There are parents and there are children and there are sibling nodes, and they are all related to one another. There are other types of data structures and different ways that you can manipulate data structures. So you can link things in different ways in order to be able to traverse more efficiently. For example, when you think about ancestry, you don't think about a direction of adults can only communicate towards children and children cannot communicate towards adults. But in certain data structures, children cannot communicate to their parent. They can only communicate to their children. Business rules is what we want to be able to accomplish for a customer. So a business rule is, let's say a customer must be over 21 to order. And how we organize that in code, there's different ways that we could go about organizing the logic, but a business rule informs us how we should create logic, and sometimes they're one and the same, like customer must be over 21. That's pretty, let's say this. There's a difference between the way that a data structure interacts and the way that a business rule. I just talked about this parent-child relationship. That is pure logic. There is not going to be a business rule that tells you how you should structure your memory in your applications. Business rules talk about how customers interact with your applications. Shape of data. Shape of data means Literally, if you look at text, the number of indents and whatnot, it is literally the shape of the data. So if you have, say, a person, they have a first name and a last name and an address and a social security number and such, that definition is the shape of the data, both in the literal sense, the shape of the data as it appears in the text file, but also we consider to be the shape of the person is that the person has a first name and a last name and a social security number. And if we need, going back to duck typing, if we need two types of data to coexist together or operate together, then their shapes need to be the same, meaning that there are certain properties, like for example, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. All squares match the rectangle shape. This kind of sense of thing. Carpal tunnel is what you get when you use a mouse. That is why I have a trackpad, because I don't want carpal tunnel. It is when you have wrist pain from repetitive stress, typically of moving your wrist back and forth rather than keeping your wrist straight. Oh, I don't know if I was actually that. So you move your wrist back and forth like this, like you might with a mouse when you're first starting out and not used to an 8-hour job, versus moving your whole hand like you would with a trackpad or on a keyboard. Docker is the solution for Python. I'll leave it at that for now. No, I'll go a little bit more into it. Docker is a way to, it is literally invented to solve the problem of Python. Let me tell you the problem of Python. Python is pre-installed or readily available on all computers. If you open up a Windows terminal and you type Python, it will say, do you want to install Python? If you do it on Mac, Python's already there. If you do it on Linux, Python's already there. There are literally 100 different versions of Python. There are two significant versions, Python 2 and Python 3, but then there's lots of subversions. And then every tool in Python has its versions, and they all want to install at the system level. So it's very easy for things to conflict, and then everything that relies on Python to break. So Docker was invented to solve this problem, so that instead of installing Python onto your system, which, by the way, I'd recommend using PyEnv to solve that problem rather than Docker, because Docker is rather heavy-handed for this, but it is appropriate in some cases. You use a Docker container which has one version of Python and one version of everything that it needs to have in it, and it does its one job, and you have this extremely huge, bloated thing. But the advantage is that it doesn't screw up your system, and that you can copy it to another system and it will still work. Docker solves the works on my machine problem, so you can Google that. AWS, likewise, is an overly complicated way to do things. It is necessary in some cases, stands for Amazon Web Services, but basically it's how to build a sandwich with a chainsaw. If you need it, you need it. But everybody thinks they need it and they want to sound cool when they talk about it. But if you really know what it is and what tools are available, you'd realize most of the time you want to build your sandwich with a knife, not with a chainsaw. But problems I can't solve in the world. S3 is actually an elegant solution from AWS for file storage, which basically means you upload a file to a web page and you can download a file from a web page, and you don't consider much files and folders and such. The folders are just part of the name, and you request it by its full name and you get it by its full name. And it's a simple storage service or something like that. This is not just AWS. Everybody implements this. Everybody. So any service that you use online will have an object storage or S3 service. Azure is Microsoft's version of AWS, which is a little bit different. It's not quite as compatible with AWS specifically as a lot of the other providers kind of model their tools after AWS, because AWS, despite being one of the worst systems, in my opinion, is the one that is the most heavily marketed and therefore the one that most people have heard about. If you have used DigitalOcean, you know that it is a delight to use, as are some of the others, Vultr or Scaleway, etc. Integrated development platform, I think I'm just going to leave that for another time. So we've done our Spitfire. It's gone on for more minutes than I originally had intended it to, but I hope that you enjoyed. Good night. Adios. Integrated development environment is something like Vim or VS Code. You should get both Vim and VS Code. Subscribe, follow, all those things. Thumbs up if you liked it.